back to Harbour Unboxed. We kind of lied to you guys. We did too much waffling.
No.
I probably take the blame for that, but I'm going to blame Tim for the waffling, that is, and probably whatever else I messed up. But yeah, part 3. We had to do a part 3 because we did way too much talking, too many long-winded answers.
Yes, we jumped the gun when we said part 2 is only going to be 2 parts, because we then realized, oh wait, there are all those questions we didn't answer.
And those ones we took ages answering.
So, here we are. We're back with part 3.
So,
more questions.
You guys have been asking for a part 3 for a couple of months now. We haven't done one for quite a few months. So, for those of you that have wanted a part 3, well, your prayers have been answered. So, before we do any more answering of questions, today's video sponsor is Thermal Grizzly and their Cryonaut Extreme, which is now available in a 2-gram syringe. This high-performance thermal paste delivers maximum thermal conductivity thanks to an extremely small particle size and layer thickness. It's also very flexible, capable of standing up to sub-zero temperatures for extreme overclocking, but also performs exceptionally well for air and water cooling applications. So if your CPU or GPU needs repasting, then I suggest checking out the Thermal Grizzly range. Link is in the video description. Alright. When do you think we'll see CPUs with double the single-thread performance of the current gen consoles? So 3.5-ish gigahertz Zen 2. I ask because Unreal 5 is super heavy on the CPU and targets 30 FPS on console, so it would need twice the performance to hit 60 FPS on PC. Not quite sure it works that way to begin with.
There's a few considerations there with the whole, you need double the CPU performance at 60 FPS. Yeah, maybe, but also how optimized are those early Unreal Engine 5 demos for today's hardware?
Well, you're
Will
also
console
assuming
developers target 30 FPS. A lot of question marks there, but
also for this question to be right, the entire assumption would have to be that you are 100% CPU limited and in no way GPU limited, and it's almost certainly the reverse. You're almost likely 100% GPU limited. And there'll be some instances where that CPU is a little bit limited, but probably not that much.
Yeah, I think on the latest demos, the CPU does get slammed very hard.
Okay.
I'm not sure whether it's like an all-core situation versus a single-thread situation, but certainly some of those demos do struggle to reach 60 FPS on powerful GPUs because of the CPU limit. Mm-hmm. But that said, like I said, it's a very early demo, and I'd be very surprised if that level of performance was shipped.
Yeah,
we're talking demos, right? These are not optimized scenarios, and a lot of console games today are 60 FPS. Like going backwards and only having 30 FPS modes would be a shock to a lot of console gamers.
Look, it'd be great if they were utilizing the CPU to that degree in an effective way, not in an unoptimized way. Yeah, I'd be surprised. It would be a dramatic change and a dramatic step in the right direction.
Anyway, if we take the question at face value and ignore the sort of issues with it, when are we going to see double the single-thread performance of 3.5 gigahertz Zen 2? So how close does OLED get today?
I would say, off the top of my head, the 12900K, now this is using Cinebench.
Yep.
I would say we're at about 50% for the 1200K versus like a 3700X.
But is that including the frequency difference as well? Because this is a lower clocked Zen 2 than a 3700X.
So they're talking about clock for clock IPC gain?
No, I think they're talking just single thread in general.
Yeah, it's about 50%.
So so if you're going from 3.5 gigahertz Zen 2 up to like 5 gigahertz Alder Lake, it's about 50%, you reckon?
Yep, I think so, yep.
So we're probably not that far off then.
It might be a bit, at that frequency, so if it's 3, it might be a bit higher. It's at least 50, let's put it that way.
At least 50.
At least 50. We're halfway there. Possibly a bit more. The thing that's thrown me is I'm not sure how much difference the frequency makes to the equation. Yes. So I'd have to test it. It's at minimum 50%, I would say off the top of my head. But it's not 100%.
Yes, you're probably looking at, 20% faster than that would be getting... 2 generations of 20% gains would get you there.
I would say, that would be the soonest you could possibly get there. Would be 2 more CPU generations. 2 more CPU.
So it's not that far. It's not that far from double.
If they do really well.
But I think the gains we've seen from products like 5800 X3D from Alder Lake makes something like this possible.
Well, see, that's where it becomes confusing because the single core performance that you get in a program like Cinebench goes backwards with that CPU, despite the fact that it's up to like 50% faster for gaming. So
You get what I mean, though, right?
No, I'm just saying, like, it makes it very difficult to actually gauge the gaming performance of those parts by using Cinebench. What I'm trying to say is my way of approaching this topic to explain it is pretty well flawed, proven by the 5800X3D.
Yes, you'll need the IPC improvement you see in Cinebench plus cache improvements that you see in games. But yeah, but I think to answer the question, we're probably a couple of generations away from this being
at least, I would have
reality.
Thought. Yeah.
With the arrival of QD-OLED monitors, do you think they will have any impact on the pricing of full array local dimming / mini LED monitors like the PG32UQX? Or are there still enough advantages with traditional mini LED monitors to justify their $2,000 price tag?
Want me to handle this one?
Yeah, that'd be interesting. No, the price tag I think that we see for those super expensive monitors is just because there's no competition. It's like any product category where there's zero competition, they just go, well, we can charge whatever we want and people will pay.
Good news, sales guys, make up a number.
Yep, pretty much. And with those high-end products, people have clearly shown the ability to pay $2,000, $3,000 for monitors. And even with TVs, they go up to like $40,000, $50,000 for high-end, units. So with QD-OLED, I would expect that, there's now competition. So pricing like that is not going to be justified. But of course, at the same time, there are still advantages to those monitors. Things like the versatility of them, the standard sub-pixel layout, more reasonable coatings for use in brighter environments. Those are things that still are advantages. So it's not like QD-OLED has come out and is smashing everyone to the floor. There's no advantages to buying those more expensive monitors. There's still some advantages, which I think is where they're still going to see sales. But I think the days of those products being sold for $3,000 and that's over. That's not gonna fly in the current market. With electricity pricing going up everywhere, I feel like idle system power should be given at least a little bit of screen time in reviews. Since even a small 20 watt difference at idle power with say 12 hours a day would amount to almost $40.
I just want to save on power.
You're saving on power? Steve over here trolling. Right. So this person's not even paying that much in terms of power. Places like Germany are getting 50 to 65 cents a kilowatt hour. Of course, this person's using a Threadripper as well, but perhaps nowadays more people would be interested in idle power reporting. So what do you think? Should we be looking more into idle power with the current sort of very high power prices that we're seeing, especially in Europe? Not so much here,
I'm always hesitant to answer these questions because when I say something like, I don't think there'll be a significant difference, people get outraged in the comments. Hardware Unboxed is so out of touch. Think of the planet. Are you guys not eco-friendly? And they just absolutely lose the plot, which is not at all what I'm saying. But all I'm saying is, while I would like computer hardware to use as little power as possible, how much difference does it honestly make? And if one GPU uses a little bit less power than another one at idle, but it's not nearly as good in terms of gaming performance, how much weight do you place on that? Like, I guess, how much importance do we actually place on this, given that, dare I say it, I don't think it makes a significant difference over a year for someone who games quite regularly or uses their computer quite regularly.
And, in this example, it says even a small 20 watt difference at idle power, 12 hours a day would amount to almost $40 a year. And I guess, there are some people that would leave their PC on 12 hours a day idling. However, not to, discredit what this person does in their life, but if you're not actually using your PC 12 hours a day and you're worried about the power costs, you'd actually be better off switching it off as opposed to leaving it running and idling.
And I guess to add to that...
Which then means that if you actually are using it 12 hours a day, that's quite a high usage. That's above normal.
And I'll add, again, I don't think burning and wasting power is a trivial thing or a good idea, but I'm not super concerned over $40 throughout the year. If product A and product B are the same in every other metric, but one will save me in this equation $40 per year, then that's the better product. But I think I don't want to put too much emphasis on that because there are other things for me like performance and all that sort of stuff that would heavily outweigh. Like if you're spending $1,000 or even $500 on your GPU, it's like $40 a year.
Yeah, that's pretty much. That's pretty much it, isn't it?
You're
Like,
so entitled. You're so privileged. It's like, yeah.
well, I think PC gaming is sort of a privileged position, especially high-end PC gaming.
Like, you don't need to PC game. It's a it's a fun pastime.
Yeah,
thing.
again, I'm not saying that $40 doesn't matter, but I think
we're not burning money over here.
And to provide some context for this, Steve and I, we were discussing this the other day about the sort of electricity side of things, and a lot of the sort of quick napkin maths that we were doing on how much it would actually cost, efficient parts versus inefficient parts. In a lot of realistic situations, the difference, even at very high power prices, was like $20 a year for like a gaming system being used, 4 hours a day, which is quite a lot. And that
7
was,
days a week, yeah.
Yeah, that was the difference between, that was like 50 watts of difference was costing about that much. So, I think there are some use cases where idle power and power consumption of parts does matter, but it's going to be your heavy power users, people using their PCs a lot. And then you sort of have to factor that in with, the times when $40 over a year makes a lot of difference for people are people who don't have a lot of money to spend. They're more likely to be budget system builders, budget buyers who, and those parts tend to be more efficient parts just because you're getting lower end parts. They don't use as much power. They tend to be sitting more in the optimal zone for performance per watt.
Yeah, and if you're really worried about this sort of thing, undervolting is an option. A lot of products can be underclocked, undervolted. That can save significant amounts of power. So, yeah, it's hard to say how much weight we should place on that kind of stuff. I think some people try to use it to, say, oh, this AMD GPU is better than this NVIDIA GPU because it will save you $40 a year. But yeah, you have to do the performance per watt equation, I suppose. And then if it turns out that one GPU is significantly better, and yeah, it's a factor. I'm not saying it's nothing and we should completely ignore it, but yeah, we're talking about idle power here anyway.
Yeah, and I guess the point with this question is there's a lot of considerations that have to be made as to how relevant something like that is. And I think there's a lot of situations where it's not that relevant, and there are sort of a couple of edge cases for power users where it may make a difference.
Yeah, with AM5, already a lot of these next generation CPU questions are coming up. With AM5 coming out in a few months, would you recommend upgrading the CPU, so let's say a Ryzen 5 2600, on a B450 motherboard, or would you wait and build a completely new system based on AM5 later in the year? So upgrade now or wait. The classic upgrade now or wait question, which comes up every single time there's something on the horizon, but it is a reasonable question to ask. Well, we're talking about mid-range sort of stuff. So if you're going a Ryzen 5 2600, what was that, like 200, 220, somewhere in that vicinity? Yep. So it stands to reason you're probably still looking at spending that money and you're not going, oh, I'm going to go ham this time and get a 5800X 3D, which is, more than twice the price. So that would leave you with a Ryzen 5 5600, which is quite a substantial upgrade when CPU limited, and certainly a worthwhile upgrade. You could probably get a bit of money back on the 2600 as well, so it'd be a fairly cheap drop-in upgrade. You're really comparing two very different things. So what would you get for a 2600? $50 US?
Used,
somewhere,
maybe.
100, probably 50, somewhere in there. And what are they selling for now? 200, 150. Let's say it's $150 US changeover. Pretty cheap upgrade for pretty noticeable performance upgrade. We're talking fairly significant gains when CPU limited. What's Zen 4 AM5? What's that going to cost you? Motherboard's probably going to be at least that price alone. DDR5 memory, the CPU. You're really looking at a totally different thing. Very different set of figures that you'd be working with. So
yeah, I think for budget upgrades, it's not going to make a lot of sense. Yep. For people on that sort of generation, it probably makes more sense to go to exhaust the AM4 path.
I think so,
of upgrading. Because
you could still sell that. You'd get immediate noticeable performance uplift if you are CPU limited, which that's why you'd be upgrading. So you get a noticeable performance uplift now, and then if towards the end of the year, early next year, you want even more performance, you're getting a higher end next generation GPU or something, then I would sell the system you've got now, recover some funds there, and go the full hog. The 5800X 3D is where it's sort of like, it's a really impressive bit of kit, but do you want to drop, like, what are they? I don't even know what they're available for at the moment. I haven't actually looked. So
they're supposed to be $450.
But they've all, I looked locally, they were all sold out straight away, and there were people trying to, get much more for them. But let's say you could get one for $450. Should you do that? I think that's the type of CPU that would hold its value really well, to be honest. But I think at this point, I would rather just wait.
Yeah, I think the AM5 sort of thing, it's really going to come down to, well, the pricing of things like DDR5 memory is going to be a big consideration, but also, it's probably going to make the most sense just for high-end buyers like the 5800X3D sort of buyers for the beginning. Like people that have already, as I said, it sort of exhausted the AM4 pathway, so they're already using some sort of Zen 3 processor. Then it makes sense to jump over to AM5 because, again, there's going to be a lot of costs associated with swapping your motherboard and memory. Whereas if you're already behind on AM4, there's still a lot of pathway to go on that platform and a lot of gains you can get without having to do that huge capital expenditure.
No, it's true.
of buying that motherboard and memory. And I think a lot of people will be sort of going down that path, I would have thought.
So it's basically the same advice we gave for GPU shoppers. Don't buy an RTX 3090. Well, don't do that anyway, or a 3090 Ti, or even a 3080. If you're in that lower end segment, like, the RX 6600, that seems like a pretty safe bet. You can't go too wrong.
Like use up your upgrade path for the stuff you currently have, and in a price point and stuff that makes sense. Don't go splurging. And then by the time your Ryzen 5 5600 stops being a powerful enough part, hopefully things like DDR5 memory will be really cheap and available for AM5. Maybe, there's always going to be early adopter taxes for these sorts of things.
Definitely.
So hopefully all of that will have calmed down, and then you can jump over to the new platform.
Yeah, I think that's a safe bet. I reckon that's the way to go. All right, Tim, bit of an interesting looking question here on the surface. When some games only use 1 to 2 cores, do 8-core CPUs still have more FPS, even though they have nearly the same clock as 4 to 6-core a CPU from the same generation? So, for example, is the 12700K worth $100 more than the 12600K for gaming only? Well, if a game only uses 1 to 2 cores, like a Cities Skylines, sort of an older game like maybe StarCraft 2, for example, in those examples, then the only advantage the 127... So the Intel stuff's a bit funny because of the more cores / more cache video that I did. So the 12700K will always end up being a little bit faster when CPU limited to 1 to 2 cores. Well, not always, because maybe you need more cores to take advantage of the larger L3 cache, but could be because it has more L3 cache, like we see with the 5800X 3D, which that was faster in those examples.
Yep.
So the more... Yeah. So basically, if we're breaking it down to just an argument of cores, so let's use Zen 3 because it's a way better example than Intel stuff, because the level 3 cache capacity is adjusted depending on how much money you want to spend. But if we're talking about just cores and you're just playing that game and doing nothing else, then there's no advantage to having the higher core count parts. The other cores sit there idle. They're doing nothing. The only time that would change is if those cores are being used. So you're using them for video encoding or something like that, streaming. Yep.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's really only either the extra frequency that you typically get with higher end parts or the extra cache.
Yeah. So in the case of the 12600K versus the 12700K, the 12700K is definitely the fastest CPU for pretty well everything, whether it's single core performance or multi-core. Whether it's worth the $100 more, I think it was in this example, that'll come down to you. It's really hard to say. It entirely depends on the scenario, what type of games you'll be playing, what kind of frame rates you want, the type of GPU you'll be using. There's a whole host of things there. So if you're seeking maximum performance, like a Rainbow Six Siege title, medium quality things, you want to drive as many frames as possible, I'd get the 12700K. If it's more of a mid-range sort of budget conscious thing where you're not needing hundreds of FPS, and maybe for Tim's style of gameplay, which is, you like Assassin's Creed type games and all that sort of, you like a lot of games, but predominantly you find yourself playing single player, and for you the extra money would probably be a waste.
All right, next question. This was a bit of a long one that I've simplified a bit for the YouTube
Bit of
viewers.
trimming done.
Do you think Intel's re-debut into the GPU market is too late? Who would want to go with Intel and their brand new bleeding edge platform when the AMD and Nvidia equivalents are available on much more established platforms for a probably similar price?
Yeah, look,
It's an interesting question.
yeah, the way it's been phrased and worded, I don't necessarily disagree with it. Having said that, there's a lot that's yet to be seen, and I don't want to be the world's biggest dope and be like, too late, it's going to be too little, too late, it's going to suck, it's not going to be good, and then it turns out to be the best thing since sliced bread.
Yeah.
So
We don't know price or performance. So it makes the question very hard.
it does. Again, as we just saw over the last 2 years, you don't necessarily need the fastest GPU, which was kind of funny timing for AMD to become so competitive at the high end when that's not really what we needed over the last 2 years. We just needed something you could buy. It's really, the bar was set very low, but had there been a sort of even below mid-range, but well-priced GPU, that would have been
they could have come
amazing.
out with an entry-level card, but I think there is some merit to this question because, releasing a product now, they're competing in a different set of circumstances.
Definitely.
Today, cards are available. Pricing isn't amazing, but it's way better than it was. And you're now able to just buy from established brands. Whereas if they launched 6 months ago, they had an opportunity to get easy wins just by being available. They would have got easy wins in sales. Whereas today, they really have to now think about their pricing and performance and go up against cards that you can just buy off store shelves.
The timing's unfortunate for them.
If they end up with 3070-ish level performance, those cards are selling for around $600 to $700 US. Previously, they could have potentially sold that card for a lot more and would have flown off shelves. But today, you're probably looking at that card needing to be a fair bit cheaper than those products, which is how capable is Intel of doing that? I don't know. So they've kind of not had the optimal launch timing, let's say.
There's no doubt about it.
Is it too late? I mean, if you're launching a product for the first time, you have to get it out at some point. You have to make the leap and invest in that GPU generation and the future generation. So you're going to have to do it at some point, but it wasn't optimal.
They missed out on the gravy train or
Yes.
getting in on the ground floor.
Absolutely.
Because in the sense that they would have sold their whole inventory at a premium, as you just said, instantly. Whereas now the pricing becomes an issue, and things like if driver support's not as good, which it's unlikely to be, it's hard for them to even charge nearly as much. We're seeing this situation now where AMD and Nvidia are so evenly matched, so competitive in terms of rasterization performance, that additional features really weigh heavily on the decision of which way you go. So it's like superior ray tracing performance, DLSS, even though AMD is working towards further nullifying that one, but it's still a selling point. What are the advantages of buying AMD? In some instances, you get a bit more VRAM, but the drivers aren't noticeably better. The rasterization performance isn't noticeably better. They're not significantly cheaper. So it's not an obvious win for either company there. It's sort of like, depending on what you want, which way you want to go.
And that's Intel's situation, but even further exacerbated by potentially having a weaker feature set
so
than even AMD.
If I'm reviewing this product and it's not quite as fast, it doesn't have great ray tracing performance. Who knows about the upscaling stuff there, but drivers aren't as good and all that sort of stuff. It's like, I'm really looking for the price to be a fair bit lower for me to be able to justify purchasing that product.
Yep.
So, whereas, as we said previously, it's like, it's not that affordable, but you can buy it and it's way better than scalper prices. So it's an awesome alternative to no other alternative.
Due to the uplift DDR4 3800 memory gave you in some games in the 5800X3D review, do you expect that when AMD eventually adds Vcache to Zen 4, that Intel will be left in the dust in terms of gaming performance due to the higher impact, higher speed DDR5 memory may have?
Right. Well, there's no doubt. I mean, you would hope at the very least that Zen 4 leaves Elder Lake in the dust.
It'd be like a year later.
It'd be an epic fail if it didn't. So are you asking me whether it will leave Intel's product of the time in the dust?
Well, I think this question is like asking, when we move to DDR5 memory and we add Vcache to Zen 4, is that going to cause a lot of problems for like Intel parts? Because they're already on DDR5, for example.
Sure. I mean, it'll be beneficial to AMD, but we don't know what Intel will have at the time. Yes. Will Intel rise to the occasion? And if they do, then it's like, it'll be competitive. That's good.
Yeah, I mean, Intel's already got the DDR5 benefit, but at the same time, most of the gains we saw from Alder Lake were more related to the IPC gains of the CPU as opposed to
it all helps. But yeah, some games can see a 20% performance gain from the memory, which is what this question is addressing. Yep. So yeah, I mean, AMD will see those performance benefits, you would assume, but then we won't be comparing it with Alder Lake. So if we get a significant IPC uplift with Raptor Lake, then it's game on.
And then again, what you saw in your 5800 X3D review is that moving from lower speed to higher speed DDR4 memory wasn't that significant, at least compared to the more regular Zen 3 processors. So you never know. Maybe DDR5 won't have as much of an impact and won't be as much of a killer feature for Vcache Zen 4.
Yeah, I would have thought so, but at the same time, maybe you're right. I don't know. It may not. All right, another question here, Tim. Can you believe that? How long do you guys expect AM4 to stick around after AM5 arrives? Pretty interesting question, that one. Do you guys think it'll have a similar life in the fashion of the older Intel platforms, which have stuck around for quite a long time? I don't expect it to be just done, line in the sand, completely done for. But how long, I don't know how long they'll keep producing new CPUs for to sell, whether...
I don't think we'll see any more new AM4 CPUs.
No, I don't mean new models. I mean the current ones.
As in continuing to make the current models.
Current models, as in, when will they end production, I guess, is essentially what the question's asking.
Yeah. I mean, well, the starting point for this discussion is they've just launched a new AM4 CPU, the 5800X3D, so they're going to have to support the platform for a little while at least.
Well, supporting the platform is one thing, but continuing to supply the channel with parts is another thing, which I guess is what dictates. Because if you go to your favorite retailer and there's just no AM4 CPUs to buy, no Ryzen 5000 CPUs to buy, then effectively for new builds it's non-existent.
Yeah, I think though that, especially because the parts are on a different node, they're probably going to try at least, I know we were just talking about that they'll have to release some sort of new AM5 budget CPU, but they probably will try and keep AM4 around a sort of the very low-cost platform for a while, like your sort of $100, $150 CPU options will probably be AM4. How much
wafer supply they have.
Especially because they're DDR4 and AM5 is almost certainly going to be DDR5 only.
Basically, we don't know is the answer.
Yeah, I think there'll be a few years left, at least for,
Yeah, I don't know if we'll see new CPUs you can buy from retailers new for a few years. I wouldn't have thought so. I thought a year would have been stretching it. But again, I have no idea.
Again, I guess if you're talking a year from the launch of AM5.
Yeah,
don't
know.
No,
we'll have to find out. Sorry. That is it, right?
There's
no part 4, is there?
No, we're not. We're not doing a part 4, and we're not going to have to. We don't want to have to lie to the audience again about.
No. The once was enough.
Another part.
Once was enough this month.
Yep.
So thank you to everyone who asked questions, upvoted questions, asked questions on our Discord because they're awesome Floatplane and Patreon members. Thank you to all of you. I had a lot of fun this month. It was
good.
a good one. I know we say that a lot, but I think this month there was a good range of questions, a lot of interest.
Yeah, I felt like we just did the Patreon and Floatplane live stream before this as well, and there was a lot of good topics to cover for that. So if you are interested in signing up to Patreon and Floatplane, you can watch the replay of that. But I think there was some good questions asked by our members for another time in that section
there's
as well.
So another hour plus of us waffling. So if 3 parts for the Q&A series wasn't enough, then Floatplane Patreon, check them out. Links in the video description.
Yep. Some interesting updates on things like ASRock and all sorts of stuff. So
the
ASRock word, things have been happening. Anyway, that's pretty much it for this video. Thanks for watching, pretty much.
Yep, Floatplane Patreon, we've mentioned that. We've mentioned all the bits and pieces.
Subscribe,
subscribe,
like this video, dislike, don't do that.
If somehow you stumbled across this video, there is a part 2 and a part 1 with lots of awesome questions that we delve into, so go back and watch them. And apart from all of that, just thank you for watching. I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim.
See you next time.